Somewhere inside you is a person you have not allowed yourself to become. You can feel them, sometimes, in the choices you don't make, the words you don't say, the life you don't pursue, because you already know how the people around you would react. You have learned with great precision exactly what disappoints them. The disapproving silence, the wounded look, the guilt that arrives, heavy and immediate, whenever you do something for yourself that someone else would rather you didn't. And so you don't. You bend, you accommodate, you keep the peace. You become, again and again, the version of yourself that keeps everyone else comfortable. And you call it being a good person. But there is a cost to this that no one warns you about, and you've started to feel it. Every time you choose their comfort over your own truth, something in you gets a little smaller. The real self you keep postponing recedes a little further, and you begin to suspect, quietly and uneasily, that a life spent never disappointing anyone is a life in which you never actually become yourself at all. A life lived entirely inside the expectations of others, in which the person you truly are never gets to exist, because their existence would inconvenience someone. Friedrich Nietzsche understood this with a ferocity that few thinkers have ever matched. He saw that the pressure to never disappoint, to always accommodate, to make yourself acceptable to the people around you is not simply kindness or virtue. It is a mechanism of control, one that keeps you tame, predictable, and small, and that stands directly between you and the person you are capable of becoming. And he insisted on a truth that is uncomfortable precisely because it is liberating. You cannot become yourself without disappointing people. The disappointment is not a sign that you've done something wrong. It is the price of becoming someone at all. Friedrich Nietzsche was a 19th-century German philosopher who launched one of the most radical challenges to conventional morality in the history of Western thought. He was not interested in gently refining the moral ideas of his time. He wanted to examine them at their roots, to ask where our notions of good and evil actually came from, whose interests they served, and what they did to the individuals who lived under them. And what he found led him to a series of conclusions that remain shocking today. Nietzsche argued that much of what we call morality is not the timeless, self-evident truth it presents itself as, but a historical construction, one that developed, in large part, to serve the interests of the group over the individual. He was especially interested in what he called herd morality, the system of values that prizes conformity, self-sacrifice, obedience, and the suppression of individual difference. This morality, he argued, rewards the person who fits in, who does not stand out, who subordinates their own drives and desires to the needs and comfort of the collective. And it punishes, with disapproval, with guilt, with the accusation of selfishness or wickedness, the person who dares to become an individual, to pursue their own path, to affirm their own life against the expectations of the group. This was the heart of his provocation. Nietzsche saw that the values a society holds up as most virtuous, humility, selflessness, the constant consideration of others, the reluctance to ever put oneself first, could function as instruments of control. They keep individuals docile. They make people easy to manage. They ensure that no one rises too far above the herd, becomes too distinct, affirms themselves too strongly. And they do it not through external force, but through something far more effective, through guilt, through the internalized sense that to pursue your own becoming, to disappoint the expectations of others, is not merely inconvenient, but morally wrong. Nietzsche's project was to expose this mechanism and to call for its overcoming. He believed that the highest human achievement was to become a genuine individual, to become who you truly are, in his famous phrase, and that this required breaking free from the herd morality that kept people tame. He did not mean becoming cruel or destructive. He meant becoming free. Free enough to determine your own values, to pursue your own path, and to bear the disapproval that inevitably comes when you stop living according to what everyone else needs you to be. For Nietzsche, this was not selfishness. It was the fundamental precondition of a life actually worth living. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. To understand why you can't become yourself without disappointing people, you have to understand the specific tool that keeps you from doing it. And Nietzsche identified that tool with unnerving precision. It is guilt, the internalized voice that makes the pursuit of your own life feel like a moral failing, and the disappointment of others feel like a crime you have committed. Nietzsche was fascinated and disturbed by the psychology of guilt, which he explored in depth in his work on the origins of morality. He argued that guilt, what he sometimes called bad conscience, is not a natural, God-given faculty, but something that was developed and cultivated, a turning of the human being's own aggressive energy back against itself. And he saw how it functioned in the moral system of the herd. The individual who might otherwise pursue their own desires, affirm their own will, become their own person, is kept in check by an internal mechanism that floods them with guilt the moment they step outside the bounds of what others expect. They do not need to be externally punished for becoming themselves. They punish themselves preemptively with guilt, and so they never even try. This is the genius and the horror of the system, as Nietzsche saw it. External control is expensive and unreliable, but if you can install in a person an internal sense that their own self-affirmation is morally wrong, that to disappoint others, to prioritize their own becoming, to refuse the role assigned to them, is a sin, then you have created a being who controls themselves, who polices their own drives, who keeps themselves small without anyone having to force them to. The guilt does the work. And the person experiences this self-suppression not as oppression, but as virtue, congratulating themselves for their selflessness even as they slowly disappear. You can feel this mechanism operating whenever you contemplate doing something genuinely for yourself that someone else would rather you didn't. The immediate flood of guilt, the sense that you are being selfish, ungrateful, a bad person, the urge to apologize, to explain, to justify, to abandon the whole idea and return to accommodation. Nietzsche would tell you to look very closely at that guilt, because it is not, as it presents itself, the voice of your conscience telling you an important moral truth. It is very often the voice of the herd, installed inside you, keeping you obedient. It is the mechanism by which your own becoming has been made to feel like a betrayal. And here is the crucial point. As long as you obey that guilt, as long as you treat the disappointment of others as evidence that you've done something wrong, you will never become yourself, because becoming yourself will always, at some point, require doing something that disappoints someone. The guilt is precisely the barrier. To become who you are, you have to be willing to feel it and act anyway, to recognize it as the herd's voice rather than your own, and to move through it toward the life that lies on the other side. Nietzsche's most radical claim was that becoming a genuine individual requires not just bending the expectations of others, but, in a sense, breaking with the entire framework of values you were handed. And this is where his thought becomes both most difficult and most liberating. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche wrote of the need to break the old tablets, the inherited tablets of values, the received rules of good and evil that every person absorbs from their culture and their upbringing. He understood that we do not choose our initial values. They are given to us, stored in us before we can question them, by family, society, tradition. And for most people, these inherited values remain unquestioned for their entire lives. They live according to a morality they never chose, pursuing a good and avoiding an evil that were defined for them by others, never once asking whether these values are actually their own or whether they serve the life they were capable of living. To become yourself, Nietzsche argued, is to undertake the difficult and dangerous work of examining these inherited values, and where they do not serve your genuine flourishing, of breaking them. This is the work of what he called the free spirit, the individual who has won the freedom to question the values they were given, to reject the ones that keep them small, and to create new values grounded in the affirmation of their own life. It is an act of tremendous courage, because it means standing against the entire weight of what you were taught, what everyone around you believes, what the whole moral world insists is right. And it necessarily disappoints people. This is unavoidable, and Nietzsche did not pretend otherwise. When you break with the values you were handed, when you stop living according to the expectations built into you, when you begin to pursue your own becoming rather than the role assigned to you, the people invested in the old values, the people who need you to remain who you were, who benefit from your accommodation, who are threatened by your freedom, will be disappointed. They will experience your self-creation as a betrayal. They may call you selfish, ungrateful, changed, lost. They will bring every tool the herd possesses to bear on pulling you back into conformity, because your freedom calls their own conformity into question. Nietzsche understood this reaction deeply, and he had a name for the specific resentment that the conforming many often feel toward the individual who breaks free. Ressentiment, the bitterness of those who have not dared to affirm their own lives toward the one who has. The person becoming themselves must be prepared for this, not to seek it out, not to disappoint people gratuitously or cruelly, but to accept that disappointment is the unavoidable shadow of genuine self-creation. You cannot break the old tablets quietly enough to avoid disturbing those who still live by them. To become yourself is to become, in the eyes of some, a disappointment, and the willingness to bear that is the entrance fee to a life that is actually your own. Nietzsche was a philosopher of provocation, not a self-help author, but his thought points clearly toward what it actually takes to stop sacrificing yourself to the expectations of others. The work is difficult, but it is concrete. The first movement is to examine the guilt rather than simply obey it. When you feel the guilt that arises at the thought of disappointing someone, at the thought of pursuing your own path, Nietzsche would have you stop and interrogate it rather than automatically submitting to it. Ask where this guilt comes from. Ask whose voice it actually is. Ask whether the thing you're contemplating is genuinely wrong, genuinely harmful to another person, or whether it merely violates an expectation, disappoints a preference, refuses a role. Most of the guilt that keeps us small is not the response to real wrongdoing. It is the herd's mechanism, the internalized pressure to conform. Learning to distinguish genuine moral conscience from the mere guilt of self-affirmation is the essential first step. One deserves to be heeded, the other deserves to be seen for what it is and moved through. The second movement is to question your inherited values, to examine the tablets you were handed and ask whether they are truly yours. This is Nietzsche's central work of the free spirit, and it is deeply practical. Take the beliefs you hold about what a good person does, about what you owe others, about what you're allowed to want and pursue, and hold them up to examination. Where did they come from? Do you actually endorse them, or did you simply absorb them? Do they serve your genuine flourishing, or do they merely keep you accommodating and small? This is not an invitation to discard all values, but to consciously determine which ones are truly your own. To move from living by values you never chose to living by values you have examined and affirmed. Only a person who has done this work can be said to have their own life at all. The third movement is to accept disappointment as the price and pay it deliberately. This is the hardest part, and Nietzsche did not soften it. Becoming yourself will disappoint people, the ones invested in who you were, the ones who benefited from your accommodation, the ones whose values you are transcending. There is no version of genuine self-creation that avoids this. So the practice is to accept it consciously, to stop treating others' disappointment as a catastrophe to be prevented at all costs, and to recognize it instead as the natural and unavoidable consequence of becoming a genuine individual. This does not mean becoming callous or seeking to hurt people. It means being willing to let others be disappointed rather than abandoning your own becoming to prevent it. To hold your path even when it fails to please, even when it draws disapproval, even when the people you love would prefer the smaller, more accommodating version of you. It helps to understand something Nietzsche grasped clearly, that a great deal of the disappointment others feel toward you is not really about you at all. When a person is disturbed by your self-creation, by your refusal to keep playing the role they assigned you, their reaction is very often a reaction to what your freedom reveals about their own unfreedom. The person who has spent their life conforming, suppressing their own desires, obeying the values they never chose, feels an unconscious threat when they see someone break free, because that freedom implicitly asks a question they have spent a lifetime avoiding. Their disappointment, their disapproval, sometimes even their anger, is frequently a defense against that question. Understanding this does not make the disappointment painless, but it does make it bearable, because you begin to see that you are not actually doing something wrong to them. You are simply refusing to remain small in a way that made your smallness a comfort to them. And their comfort was never a good enough reason to sacrifice your life. The fourth movement is to create rather than merely rebel, to build a life grounded in the affirmation of your own values, not just in opposition to the old ones. Nietzsche was clear that breaking the old tablets is only half the work. The lion who says no to the imposed values must become the child who creates new ones. It is not enough to reject what you were handed. You must build something in its place. A life organized around what you genuinely affirm, what you actually value, what expresses the person you truly are. This is the positive, creative dimension of becoming yourself, and it is what distinguishes genuine self-creation from mere adolescent rebellion. The goal is not to disappoint people for its own sake. The goal is to become someone real, someone whole, someone whose life is an expression of their own affirmed values, and to accept the disappointment of others as the unavoidable cost of that becoming. Nietzsche looked at the pressure to never disappoint anyone, the guilt, the accommodation, the endless subordination of the self to the expectations of others, and he saw it for what it so often is. Not virtue, but a mechanism that keeps human beings tame, small, and unrealized. He understood that a life spent trying to please everyone is a life in which you never become anyone, because the self you might have become is sacrificed again and again to the comfort of those around you. And he insisted, with all the force of his philosophy, that becoming who you are is worth the disappointment it inevitably causes. This is not a call to cruelty or to selfishness in the ordinary sense, or to disregard for the people you love. It is something deeper and more difficult. It is the recognition that you have a life of your own to live, a self of your own to become, and that no one else can give you permission to live it, because the people around you, however much they love you, are often invested in the version of you that serves them and will be disappointed when you become something more. To wait for their permission, to refuse to become yourself until you can do it without disappointing anyone, is to wait forever. That permission is never coming. The disappointment cannot be avoided. And so the only question is whether you will let the fear of it keep you small for the rest of your life, or whether you will finally accept it as the price of becoming real. You cannot become yourself without disappointing people. This is not a tragedy, and it is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is simply the truth about what it costs to live a life that is actually your own. Every person who has ever become genuinely themselves has had to disappoint someone. A parent, a partner, a community, a tradition, who would have preferred them to stay who they were. The guilt you feel is not evidence of your wrongdoing. It is evidence of your becoming. And on the other side of it is the only thing Nietzsche believed was worth pursuing: a life lived as an expression of who you truly are, rather than who everyone else needed you to be. The people who are disappointed by your becoming are not your enemies, and their disappointment is not your fault. But it is also not your responsibility to prevent, not at the cost of your own existence. You were not put here to spend your one life keeping everyone else comfortable. You were put here to become who you are, and the moment you accept that this will disappoint people and choose to become yourself anyway, is the moment you stop living inside their expectations and finally, fully, begin to live.